A new defensive coordinator at Nebraska, a change at offensive line. What a wild weekend for the Huskers. That's next.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase.
All right, welcome. It is Monday on the Locked On Nebraska podcast. Connor Happer, Mitch Sherman with you. Let's recap the things first. Okay, so let's see if we can get to all the way through. You have a dismissed offensive line coach, which has much ramifications. You hired your new offensive line coach immediately to replace him.
5 minutes.
Like instantly. Defensive coordinator search looked like it was coming to an end. Then it kind of pivoted to another guy, and then you got that guy as your new defensive coordinator. Your star running back went and declared for the NFL draft. You learned your bowl destination. You learned who you're going to play in that bowl game. And that's all on the football side. Then there was basketball and volleyball stuff too. You're right, Mitch. I guess it was pretty busy after all.
Yeah, the Emmett Johnson thing about him going to the NFL seems like it happened a month ago, and we haven't talked since then. Friday afternoon or late morning was the news on Emmett Johnson leaving Nebraska, foregoing his senior season. Looks like he will not be a part of the bowl game either.
I can imagine so.
Not anything official on that, but this is the kind of announcement that he makes at this time, so he can go and start to get ready for the NFL. And congrats to Emmett Johnson on an incredible final season at Nebraska. But we need to talk about this coaching stuff, because what a weekend. Maybe the most consequential as teams fought for conference championships and the college football playoff bracket fell into place. At Nebraska, it was all about the coaching carousel, the assistant coaching carousel, and this turned out to be maybe the most consequential period of days for Nebraska since we were in this spot last year. This is not the ideal direction for your program to go, where the most important things happen in December and they happen off the field. But Nebraska didn't play a game or win a game this season that rises above the level of importance of what happened Saturday and Sunday with the offensive line coach and the defensive coordinator. Now, if Nebraska had beaten Michigan or beaten USC, we'd be saying something different, but they're still waiting for that kind of a breakthrough.
Yeah, I think the main story is, because Matt Rule removed John Butler as the defensive coordinator, and we kind of talked about the whys and sort of what was next. And obviously, we don't know exactly what Rob Aurich is going to bring yet, if that's how you pronounce his name. I think, did I get that right, Mitch? Aurich?
I think it's Oric.
Oric. Okay.
Yeah, we'll get a clarification on that.
So not exactly sure what he's going to bring to the table, but we have some ideas, and there's some unknown there. But I think the big move and the most consequential, to use your word, Mitch, is firing Donovan Raiola. And then bringing in the new offensive line coach, but removing Donovan Raiola comes with, like all sorts of implications, and obviously the Raiola part of it is a really big deal. And I think even more so, given that you could have reasonably kept Donovan Raiola, and I think people would have been probably okay with it. Not that they control everything that goes on and stuff like that, but Nebraska's offensive line, started to get a little bit of push as the year went along. There was a general sort of confidence in that group, at least more so than it had been at the beginning of the year. When you changed from pass protection straight up to, hey, we're going to run the ball. Offensive line started to look a little bit better, a little bit more confident, but the offensive line coach goes anyway. So I think there's a lot of sort of arms to this story.
I believe it's Oric, like a CH rich sound. So we got that got that answered. I found the Minnesota Duluth 2 deep versus Northern State in 2009. This is when Rob Aurich was playing college football. So he's not an old guy. We're talking about maybe 37 years old in that range. That's the direction that Nebraska has chosen to go with the defensive coordinator. I like the hire. I really like the hire, and I'm not just saying that. I wasn't entirely sold on what Nebraska was looking at in Vince Karras, but we can get into later in the show why I believe that, why I say that about Oric. Yeah, but yeah, the Raiola thing creates a huge headline. It was something that was noticed nationally. And of course, the unavoidable connection to his nephew, Dylan Raiola, Nebraska's 22-game starter over the last 2 years at quarterback. There's the hook. Like, that's why this is a big deal, because now Dylan's uncle has been fired from the Nebraska football program. And I'm with you, Connor. Like, the offensive line, when Nebraska decided to play the kind of style that suited its offensive linemen best in the second half of the season, some of that coincided with the injury, the season-ending injury to Dylan Raiola. But the line, despite absorbing multiple season-ending injuries, played and performed at its best level in October and November. And Emmett Johnson had a lot to do with that. And if you go to the UCLA game, TJ Lateef had something to do with that. But we're not going to come down hard on Donovan Raiola in the line for everything that happened this season, giving up 30 sacks, and then say they don't get credit for a 1,400-yard rusher. And now other people get credit for that. The wide receivers, Emmett Johnson certainly gets some credit for that. But this line, it's not just like a black and white, man, that was the downfall of Nebraska football in this 7-5 season. However, Nebraska was not developing and producing at tackle and producing the kind of play at offensive tackle that was needed for this program to thrive offensively. And something had to be done with the way that the offensive tackles were being coached and developed. And you could have chosen to keep Donovan Raiola. In the way that staffs are structured today, you could certainly have brought somebody in to coach tackles. You could have brought somebody in to be the offensive line coach and made Donovan Raiola your interior offensive line coach. That is clearly not the way that Matt Rule chose to do this. And we have not mentioned the name Geep Wade. Geep Wade is the new Nebraska offensive line coach. He is in from Georgia Tech. So while the focus is on Raiola and how he was fired and what this means for Dylan Raiola and his future at Nebraska, what matters most, well, what Matt Rule would say matters most for Nebraska is that Geep Wade is here, and he's here today. He's going to coach the Nebraska offensive line in the bowl game against Utah on New Year's Eve in Las Vegas.
Yeah, I'd be really curious to hear, when we get to bowl practices in a couple weeks, like what that's like, what's different, how heavy-handed is he going to be for the bowl game? Probably not, but I'm curious about what's different from a philosophical standpoint between him and Donovan Raiola. And so the question I think that you get down to with Donovan is, does this represent a change in direction for Nebraska on the offensive line as far as the philosophy is concerned and the teaching is concerned and the development is concerned? You could obviously make that case. Or do you go for the more juicy headline and say this represents a separation from the Raiolas, period? And with one gone already, Dayton, the second one now gone, and Donovan.
Yeah, there's the second shoe to drop as it comes to the Raiola story. I don't think that a whole lot changed on Saturday as it relates to Dylan. If this had been a year ago and Nebraska moved on, fired Donovan Raiola, then I think, yes, that would have been a huge factor if Matt Rule had not retained Donovan Raiola when he got to Nebraska. I think it would have made it considerably more difficult for the Huskers to recruit Dylan. Dylan has now been in the program for 2 years. He's pushing 21 years old. He, has his own endorsements, is a 7-figure earner. I think we should stop treating him and looking at this situation like he's a 17-year-old or an 18-year-old and like he's attached at the hip to his uncle. He's going to make his decision for him, and it very well may lead him to another school in 2026. But I don't think that the Donovan Raiola departure is is one and the same with what's happening with Dylan. He may come back and be the quarterback at Nebraska for an offense that does not include his uncle as the O-line coach. I could see that happening in 26. I could maybe see more likely him leaving, but I don't think it's directly related to Donovan's departure.
No, but I think both of the things combined with Donovan being out and with his younger brother Dayton not decommitting from the class, and I think it's hard for me to imagine him being in that spot without those other two people there, and not just because he's attached to the hip and he really likes being around them. It's although there's a really 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 strong sort of family component and all of those things. But no, I just, it's just difficult for me to see. And I think there was a lot of reasons for Dylan to, separate anyway, after this past season. But, it makes it maybe a little bit more obvious or makes the writing more clear on the wall that, when those two aren't there. I don't know one way or the other. I don't know what's going to happen. It would be a surprise to me at this point if he's the only Raiola in Lincoln next year.
It would be a surprise. I would say maybe a slight surprise. So I think you have to take a look at what college football is today when you assess this situation. It would be clean. Yes, all the Raiolas are gone at one time. And Dayton was never here, never signed with Nebraska. It was just a long-time commit, but he was a part of the, unofficially a part of the program. The thing that I look at with Dylan is, let's not be blind to what college football is today and the fact that he was making $3 million, somewhere in that neighborhood, in 2025 to be the Nebraska quarterback, all said and done, when you add up his rev share with his third-party NIL and the Adidas deal that he has. It's not easy to just pick that up and say, I'm going to plop this down at another school and I'm going to make that same kind of money. And some of this is about compensation. There are no guarantees for Dylan Raiola at the next level. We just saw him suffer a broken leg in the game against USC barely a month ago. So you have to take into account your own personal earning power. And if it's cut in half because he leaves Nebraska, then that's a reason not to leave Nebraska. I don't think it would be that significant. He may have to take a pay cut. He may not. He may be able to negotiate a pay raise, him and his representation. And I think that's probably what's being assessed and looked at right now here in this period. Nebraska's back at practice today, by the way, on Monday with a youthful kind of focus on this week before the true bowl prep gets kicking late this week or early next week. So this is a time where you would expect that there are conversations that are being had to get a gauge for what Dylan Raiola may be able to command somewhere else outside of Nebraska. But this pool of schools is not open to everyone. It presumably would be limited to Adidas programs. So is he going to go to Texas Tech? Is he going to go to Indiana? Is he going to go to Georgia Tech, Miami? Like these are some possibilities with schools that are sponsored by Adidas. I'm kind of joking on the Texas Tech thing because I think that would open an odd conversation. If he follows Mahomes to his former school, whatever. Like that's something for later to discuss. But should we take a break and then get to this defensive coordinator conversation?
Yep, sounds good.
All right, that's all coming up after this. All right, here's a message from Game Time, and it's a big one because the World Cup is coming back to North America. And for the first time since 1994, with 48 teams, and for the first time ever, it's going to be massive. But let's be honest, getting tickets is usually the hardest part. That's why the Game Time app is clutch, finally giving fans a real advantage when it comes to snagging seats. With Game Time, you can track prices in real time. You can get alerts when great seats open. Buy tickets the moment they hit the app. Game Time puts the power back in your hands. It makes going to the World Cup realistic instead of impossible. You pull up the app, the layout for the seats makes it so simple to scroll through the matchups, compare seat views, pick a game, tap a section. You'll have your tickets within minutes. No confusion, no hunting for the fine print. You get alerts for teams and matches. It's all so easy to grab tickets the moment they drop instead of missing out. So take the guesswork out of buying World Cup tickets in every match, concert, or event that you want with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. All right, welcome back. Second segment of the Locked On Nebraska podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen today. And thanks for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. All right, Connor, we are going to talk about Rob Aurich. Thank you for that question about the pronunciation. He is in to Nebraska from San Diego State, replacing John Butler, who was fired long ago, December 1st. It is now December 8th. So we've reached 1 week in the post John Butler era, and here comes Rob Aurich. So what do you know? I can tell you what I know, but what do you think initially about this hire of a young coordinator, unproven at the power conference level?
I always find these really funny because all that we have to go off of is the resume and what he's done before in his past and how the stats sort of bear out, whether it's in his favor or against him or whatever it might be. And the coach Rule, he gets to interview him, he gets to talk to him, he gets to see what he's all about, and that's where you get to really understand like what you're hiring and like that's what he needs. He needs a personality guy on the defense, a guy with a little bit of an edge to him. But the resume
check.
He has quickly sort of worked himself up as well. He was at Bemidji State, South Dakota State, Idaho, San Diego State. This was actually this past year was his first year as a defensive coordinator, where they had a significant turnaround in points allowed. They were 5th nationally in scoring defense this year at San Diego State, which is awesome. And then I think you pair that along with you listen to Rob Aurich talk and you're like, okay, all right, I can get along with this. And then you pair that along with what Nebraska, I think what they're going to have next year. This is pre-portal, what they're going to have next year. And I'll tell you, like, I don't believe that Nebraska is super far away on defense. It might have looked like that in the Iowa and Penn State game, but I think this is a pretty good combo to be able to get the best out of the guys that you have. And that's sort of the story with him. That's what you'd hope with any coach. That's what you'd hope with any coordinator. But I think that's kind of bared out in his path so far.
He did coordinate the defense at Idaho and at Bemidji, but yeah, first year at the FBS level here at San Diego State this year. So he was hired at San Diego State before the 2023-4 season and coached the edge rushers. And he had an edge rusher in 2024 in Trey White, who had 12.5 sacks and then had 7 sacks this past season, was the preseason Mountain West defensive player of the year. So 19.5 sacks. He's a 255-pound edge, a little bit undersized in the height category, like not going to be off the charts NFL prospect this year. He was a junior this season, so there's a year of eligibility left for Trey White. And I wonder, since Oric has been his position coach and his defensive coordinator, and this is a guy who in White, who if he doesn't opt to go into the NFL draft this year, might be looking to say, do it against the Ohio State and Oregons of the world and say, hey, even though I'm 6'2" and run a 4.65 40, I'm a guy that you might want to draft, and I'm going to show you at the Big Ten level. So that's something to watch for sure. There's a couple other players on that San Diego State defense, and let's be real, like in today's environment in college football, part of the appeal of a coaching hire is who that coach can bring with him from his previous stop. We could talk about that with Geep Wade at Georgia Tech and Peyton Joseph, who's a former high-level recruit to Georgia Tech as an offensive lineman, announced on Saturday after Wade left Tech to come to Nebraska immediately. Like, Geep Wade's not going to coach Georgia Tech in its bowl game. Peyton Joseph is in the portal. So this is another guy definitely to look at as a possibility to transfer to Nebraska. But, with Trey White, San Diego State has a bowl game on December 20th, and he has a decision to make about playing his senior season at SDSU, going to the NFL, or potentially testing something out at a higher level. It's a name to know for sure. I'm intrigued by Oric and the personality. I think probably what came across in the interview with Matt Rule. This is a guy who, to me, is a bit of a mix between Tony White and what he brought to the Nebraska defense from an energy standpoint, personality standpoint, aggression, and Mike Eckler. Like, not quite as Energizer Bunny, bouncing up and down the sidelines persona as Eckler, but Oric is going to bring a lot of juice. And as a West Coast guy, well, he's West Coast here, and we're not going to call him a West Coast guy. He's from Michigan.
He's a northern guy.
He's a Midwest guy, but quite a bit different in the whole package from John Butler, who was through and through from the East Coast.
Yeah, I think there's not that John Butler didn't have this, but I think there's a built-in humility there, when he's sort of coached at the levels that he's coached at and worked his way up over the last couple of years. And you're right, listen to some things. He's quite the personality, which is, I think, exactly what they need. I've been talking about it on this show and every other show I can find. Like, Nebraska just needs a little bit of juice. And I think they're going to get that with this. So I did not, we talked about this last week. Like, I didn't necessarily need this next person to have, huge Big Ten experience and the resume doesn't necessarily have to be sparkling, as we've seen in the past. You can put guys in spots and it works out. So it doesn't really bother me. Just get guys to play hard, get them to play free, put them in the right position. And that's pretty much a story for me. And it looks like he checks those boxes in his background.
It's a little concern for me that not just that he hasn't done it at the Big Ten level. I think he's familiar with the Big Ten, grew up in Michigan, but it's a little bit of a concern for me. But it's not something that can't be overcome. The candidate before, at least known to us, the candidate before Oric that Nebraska was talking to was Vince Karras, who had been at Toledo for the last 5 years in the MAC, and then was a long time or several years head coach at Division III Mount Union, highly successful as a head coach at that level. Had spent his entire coaching career in Ohio, so would be familiar with the Big Ten. For whatever reason, in just reading through the bios of the two of them and putting them side by side, I had a little bit more concern about Karras and his level of his what his resume looked like. It seemed maybe more limited to one specific part. It definitely more limited to one specific part of the country. I don't know if that matters. I read through what Oric has done, and he's been in some different places. He's risen from one level to another level. He turned around the defense in a short period of time at Idaho. Yeah. And then San Diego State's the rapid jump that San Diego State made on the defensive side this year over 2024, and getting after the quarterback and stopping the run and making plays in the secondary. 32 sacks for San Diego State this year. It was in the top 25 in the country. It seems like a good fit when you combine that with the personality.
And a lot of times what you do is you go out and you hire, in a lot of characteristics, some of the opposite traits that you had in your previous coordinator. And what was the last thing we talked about with Butler? The whole, don't ever tell me the players aren't good enough. And what do you know? What Oric is sort of known for, and what he's been lauded for over the last couple of years, is fitting his defense to the personnel that he has. Right? It's exactly the opposite. So that's a great trait, by the way. And so I'm excited about the hire for sure.
That's an Urban Meyer trait. He's the king of that, and on a much more advanced level. But from his time as a head coach, when he went to Utah, when he went to Florida, when he went to Ohio State, whatever was there, he worked with, and you like to see that in head coaches and assistant coaches. One more thing on Oric. So he ran a 4.25 this season at SDSU. transformed that defense from a 3-3-5 the year before. And there aren't massive differences between those two defenses. Nebraska ran a lot of 4-man front this year, but the base defense for Nebraska presumably will be that 4-2-5 next year. And I think it better fits their personnel. We said that before the season this year, that a 4-man front better fit Nebraska's personnel. I would imagine that part of Rob Aurich's consideration process, and he would have had other options this offseason to go to Power 4 programs. Like, this was going to be a coveted young coach on the defensive coordinator landscape. I've got to imagine that part of what appealed to Nebraska, other than the obvious, I'm sure he hit it off with Matt Rule and Mike Eckler and Phil Snow and like the facility, is he looks at Williams Winery and Keona Davis and says, yeah, I can work with those guys. Like, he just did this with a 6'2", 245 to 55 pound edge rusher over the last 2 years at SDSU who totaled 20 sacks. You look at Davis, you look at Winery and say they can be all Big Ten, All-American kind of players before he's done with them.
Take a break. Big day over the week. Well, big couple days over the weekend in Lincoln. Capped off with a big basketball win yesterday. Coming up next. But first, a word from Omaha Steaks. It is holiday season, and the holidays always feel a little bit easier when you already know the perfect gift, and now you do. It's Omaha Steaks, and they make it really, really easy for you. So whether you're treating yourself this season or sending something memorable to family or friends, Omaha Steaks delivers handcrafted perfection right to your door or their door. Also, their cyber sale is here, and the deals are big. Omaha Steaks is an incredible gift to give around the holiday season. The box arrives at your door, and it is steaks. It is desserts. I mean, come on. What burgers? What could be better than that? I would rather receive that than basically anything else. So there's also great variety. As I said, steaks, burgers, comfort meals that come in the box, sides, desserts. It is an incredible gift around holiday season. So you can save big with Omaha Steaks now. Visit omahasteaks.com, 50% off site-wide, and an extra 20% off select favorites during the cyber sale. And for an additional $35 off, you could use the promo code COLLEGE at checkout. Omaha Steaks, omahasteaks.com, promo code COLLEGE. Terms apply. See site for details. All right, welcome back. Connor Happer, Mitch Sherman with you. Nebraska basketball dismantled Creighton yesterday, 71-50. 50 for Creighton. Yikes. Nebraska was swarming everywhere on defense. Game was never really close at all. Like, point blank period. Another wire-to-wire win for Nebraska, and they've now won 3 out of 4 in the I-80 rivalry.
Yeah, first win in Lincoln for Nebraska since 2018 in this series. And Nebraska, for the first time this year, I thought, played the way it's capable of playing at Pinnacle Bank Arena. And I'm sure some of that had to do with the hyped atmosphere with the rival Blue Jays in town. But Nebraska had played its best basketball to date in locations outside of Lincoln. And then definitely had it going from the beginning, 15-2 lead right off the bat. So Nebraska somehow is sitting here going into Big Ten play this Wednesday. Wisconsin is coming into PBA, and man, that should be pretty alive.
I would imagine
9-0, 13 straight wins.
I would imagine that when the AP poll comes out after this podcast is released, Nebraska may see their name on there in the low to mid 20s. Yeah, maybe. I mean, they were receiving votes pretty close last week, right?
Okay.
So get another statement win. That people kind of, I don't. Obviously, it doesn't it's not a game that people watch nationally, but a statement win against a power team. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if they had a little 24-25 by their name this afternoon.
Yeah, that would add something for sure to that Wisconsin game this week. And then Nebraska is at Illinois on the weekend. So two tests right out of the gate in this little taste of the Big Ten before Nebraska goes back into non-conference play against a couple of low majors over the Christmas holiday, and then gets into the Big Ten full bore after that. So let's see. Rink Mast had 20 yesterday
It was
in
incredible.
Lincoln.
He was definitely the best player in the game. And then Sam Hoiberg
Hoiberg.
He was everywhere. Picked his spots at the right time. And Nebraska was like connected and they were physical when they had to be, and they made shots when they had to be. Nebraska didn't even come close to playing their best game, and they still really, really wiped the floor with Creighton, took care of them. So yeah, I mean, checked all the boxes for sure.
In the battle, this game got more attention, more notice across the river to the east than most Nebraska Creighton games do, because of the presence of 3 Iowa transfers in this game. As Iowa went through a coaching transition last season, 2 of its top players transferred to Creighton. That Owen Freeman, who hung a 0 in the points column on Sunday in Lincoln, and then Josh Dix scored 9 points in this game. They were outperformed by Nebraska's lone transfer from the Hawkeyes, Price Sanford, who's been a revelation for Fred Hoiberg in this early season success at Nebraska. He had 13 and 7 rebounds, and the emergence of Price Sanford has been critical for Nebraska, especially with Connor Esigian, the second-year Husker who transferred from Wisconsin, out now with the season-ending injury. So, yeah, some things happening. For Fred Hoiberg's team, and we will eagerly await the AP poll, which means essentially nothing, but it's nice for it's definitely nice for your exposure and visibility to be ranked. So,
yeah,
excited to watch Nebraska basketball this week.
Yeah, if you have a vested interest in what happens with the AP poll, that means your team is pretty good, right? So,
right.
And Nebraska certainly does right now. Whether they're ranked today or whether you're shouting at the end of the day, rank them, you cowards, then
it would almost be better, I think, if they're not. It would almost be better. I know you like to be ranked, but again, like the real time significance of it, like it doesn't do anything for your NCAA tournament hopes or whatever. If Nebraska's not ranked, though, it has a right to be mad, like to have a chip on its shoulder going into the Wisconsin game.
And then volleyball, Nebraska steamrolled their way through the first part of the NCAA tournament against Long Island and Kansas State. Took down a couple Nebraskans in the K-State match, but handled them cleanly. And now we'll host the Sweet 16 and Elite 8 rounds in Lincoln, where they get Kansas, where that shouldn't be a particular issue for Nebraska, and then the potential fun one with either Texas A&M or Louisville for a spot in the Final Four.
Either way, Sunday night at Devaney, we're gonna pencil Nebraska through against Kansas. And I thought Miami would be the team that was coming to Lincoln. Miami had to go to Kansas as a lower seed in the first weekend and lost to the Jayhawks. Miami was in Lincoln last year for regionals, and it was kind of a scary looking team. But the Canes are done. Nebraska gets Kansas, which formidable as a Sweet 16 team. You're one of the 16 left standing. Nebraska got a taste of the Big 12 is really good. The Big 12 had more teams, 10 in the NCAA tournament to begin with, than the Big 10 did at 9. So Nebraska had some struggles against Kansas State. Kansas State scrappy and just turned a lot of points made them uncomfortable for Nebraska. So it was probably good at the end of the day for what awaits Nebraska in practice this week ahead of the Sweet 16 to have had that experience against Kansas State and have seen a different style that it didn't see all the time in the Big 10. But Sunday, if it is an Elite 8 match involving Nebraska at the Devaney Center with a berth in the Final Four in Kansas City on the line, it would be Danny Busboom Kelly against her former team Louisville, or Texas A&M, which beat Texas this year. So that gets your attention. and is one of the more athletically dynamic teams in the country. So that's that, as you would expect when you get to the Elite Eight, that's when the talent disparity is no longer a big thing.
No, not as big. Certainly, yeah. So Nebraska will have to actually play well in order to get through this round. Right. One final thing: Nebraska opens as 14-point underdogs against Utah in the Las Vegas Bowl. Oh. Any comment on that, Mitch?
Well, Nebraska has a quarterback who can't practice right now.
Running back who's
Nebraska
not
has a running back who's not a part of the practice, not, is moving on to the NFL. And the matchup against Utah, which is a punch you in the face, win at the line of scrimmage kind of program, and possibly the swan song for longtime coach Kyle Whittingham. He could be hanging it up after this game, moving on into retirement. It's at least on the table, something that's being speculated around college football circles. Yeah, this is not an ideal matchup on paper for Matt Rule in Nebraska.
No, not at all. But we'll have a couple weeks to get into that, and there's more to come as far as roster movement and potentially coach movement this week as well. So stay tuned to that. And thank you for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen today. For your second listen, you could check out Locked On Big Ten. Find it on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.